The words tore out of my grandson's small body, a raw, desperate plea that seemed to shake the very foundations of my quiet, ordered life. "Grandma, please don't go home," Leo cried, his little arms wrapped so tightly around my neck I could barely breathe, his tears a hot, damp flood against my collarbone. I held him, this 7-year-old piece of my heart, and felt a cold dread begin to uncoil in my stomach. It was just a visit, I told myself, just another ordinary Sunday dinner at my son's house. But the way he was clinging to me, the sheer terror in his voice, it felt like a final farewell. I smoothed down his soft brown hair, so much like his father's at that age, and whispered the usual comforts. "Oh, sweetheart, it's okay. Grandma will be back soon, I promise." But my eyes met my daughter-in-law's Sarah's across the room, and I saw my own confusion mirrored in her worried gaze. Something was wrong. This wasn't just a child's momentary fussiness. This was a deep, fundamental fear that had taken root in his soul, and I had no idea I was the one who had planted it. The rest of the evening was a study in quiet tension. Leo refused to leave my side, his small hand a permanent, clammy fixture in mine. My son, Michael, was unusually quiet, his movements jerky as he cleared the plates of our pot roast dinner. He'd always been a calm, steady presence, my rock after his father passed. But tonight, a nervous energy radiated from him. "He's just tired, Mom," said Michael, his voice a little too bright, a little too forced. "Big day at the park yesterday. He's probably just overtired." But I'd been a mother for 45 years. I knew the difference between a child being tired and a child being genuinely afraid. When it was finally time to leave, the scene repeated itself, a heart-wrenching echo of earlier. Leo sobbed, great heaving gasps that shook his entire frame. "Don't go, Grandma, please." "You can't." Michael had to gently but firmly pry him from my legs. The image of his tear-streaked, desperate face in the rearview mirror as I drove away haunted me for the entire 30-minute journey back to my little bungalow, the one I'd shared with Robert for 30 happy years. I tried to dismiss it. I told myself it was a phase, an attachment issue, something the parenting blogs Sarah was always reading would have a name for. But the feeling, that cold, slick dread, wouldn't leave me. It followed me through my solitary nightly routine, washing the single plate and coffee cup, letting out the cat, turning off the lamps. It sat with me in the deep silence of the living room, a silence that had once felt peaceful, but now felt heavy. My thoughts drifted back to Michael. Lately, our phone calls had been shorter, his tone always carrying a subtle undercurrent of something I couldn't quite name. Annoyance? Impatience? I'd chalked it up to the stress of his job, of being a young father. But now, connected to Leo's outburst, it felt more significant. Was he saying things to Leo? Did he not want me around as much? The thought was a physical pain, a sharp twist right behind my breastbone. Robert had always been the buffer, the diplomat between my sometimes blunt nature and Michael's sensitive soul. Without him, the path between my son and me felt increasingly rocky and unfamiliar. The next morning, the unease was still there, a low hum in the background of my thoughts. I decided to tidy up the spare room, the one I still called Michael's room, even though he hadn't lived in it for 2 decades. It was a time capsule of his high school years, a place where boxes of my own things had also migrated, creating a layered archaeology of our family's life. I was sorting through a bin of old winter sweaters when my fingers brushed against the familiar, worn leather of my old Bible. It hadn't been opened in years, not since Robert's funeral, if I was honest. But as I lifted it, a folded, tri-folded piece of paper, crisp and modern, and utterly out of place, slipped from between the thin pages and fluttered to the ground. A sense of foreboding, cold and immediate, washed over me. I knew, with a certainty that defied logic, that this was it. This was the source of the dread. My hands trembled as I bent to pick it up.
It wasn't a letter. It was a printed itinerary. At the top, in bold, professional letters, was the name of a company, Silver Sands Senior Living Community, and below that, my name, Patricia Evans. A move-in date was circled in red pen, 3 weeks from today. The room tilted. I sank onto the edge of the old twin bed, the mattress springs groaning in protest. My eyes scanned the document, not comprehending, then scanning again, forcing the words to make sense. Facility overview, monthly fee schedule, memory care wing, memory care. My breath hitched. This was more than just a retirement community. This was a plan, a detailed, coldly clinical plan for my removal. And in the margin, in a handwriting I knew as well as my own, was a note from Michael. "Mom, it's for the best. We've talked about this. We can't keep worrying like this." We? Who was we? We had never talked about this. Not once. A hot, sharp anger began to pierce through the shock, mixing with a profound, soul-crushing hurt. This was why Leo was crying. He must have overheard them. He must have heard them talking about sending Grandma away, about her not coming home, ever. He was trying to save me from a fate he only dimly understood, but I, in my blissful ignorance, had been completely unaware that my own son was plotting the end of my life as I knew it.
I sat there for what felt like hours, the crisp paper trembling in my hands, each word on the itinerary burning itself into my mind like a brand. Memory care wing. The phrase echoed, taunting me. Is that what he thought of me? That I was some forgetful, feeble old woman who needed to be tucked away? I ran a mental inventory of myself. I still paid my bills on time, remembered every one of Leo's birthdays, could recall the recipe for Robert's favorite meatloaf down to the pinch of time. But then the little moments rushed in, unbidden and suddenly sinister. The time I'd misplaced my car keys for a full day last month, the afternoon I'd called Michael by his father's name, the way I had sometimes lose the thread of a conversation if too many people were talking at once. Were those not just normal slips? Or had they been building into a case against me, a secret dossier my own son was compiling? The anger simmered, hot and bitter, but beneath it was a crushing wave of grief, for the trust that was shattered, for the future I thought I had, for the grandmother Leo saw me as, not the patient in a facility he'd be visiting on scheduled weekends. I couldn't just sit here in this dusty room, surrounded by ghosts of a happier past. I had to move, to do something before the walls of this plan closed in around me for good. I found myself in the kitchen, my hands gripping the cool edge of the sink, staring out at the bird feeder where a pair of cardinals were squabbling over seeds. Normal life, going on as if my world hadn't just been ripped open. I thought about calling Michael right then, screaming down the phone, demanding an explanation. But the note, "We've talked about this," that tiny cruel lie stopped me. Who was the we? Sarah? Had she been in on this too? The sweet, soft-spoken woman I'd welcomed into our family with open arms, the mother of my grandson, had she been sitting at my dinner table, smiling, while secretly agreeing that I was a problem to be solved? My heart ached with a fresh, specific pain. I needed to see him, to look into his eyes, the same hazel eyes as his father, and ask him how he could do this without a single honest conversation with me. But the practical part of me, the part that had raised a son and buried a husband, whispered caution. If I confronted him now, in this raw, shaking state, I might say things I couldn't take back, things that could sever our bond forever. And despite the betrayal, that was a loss I wasn't sure I could survive. So I did the only thing that felt grounding. I started to clean. I attacked the kitchen with a ferocity I didn't know I possessed, scrubbing counters that were already clean, scouring the sink until it shone. With every swipe of the sponge, I replayed memories. Michael at 10, telling me he'd protect me forever. Michael at 16, sullen and distant after Robert's death, letting me hold him only in the dark of his room. Michael just last year, hugging me tight and saying,
I don't know what I'd do without you, Mom. Were they all lies? Or had something changed? The cleaning led me to the hall closet, and I yanked it open, determined to purge, to create order from the chaos in my head. And that's when I saw it. Tucked behind a stack of old towels, a small, black notebook I didn't recognize. My breath caught. Was this another part of the plan? I pulled it out, my fingers leaving smudges on the dusty cover. It wasn't Michael's handwriting inside. It was Robert's. The sight of his familiar, looping script sent a fresh jolt through me. The date on the first page was from over a year before he died, and as I began to read, my knees went weak, and I slid down the wall to the floor, the notebook falling open in my lap. It was a journal. His private thoughts, and on the very first page, he'd written about his greatest fear, not his cancer, but the early signs of forgetfulness he'd been hiding from everyone, especially from me. He wrote about his mother, my mother-in-law Helen, who had faded away in a nursing home, a victim of dementia, and his terror that he was following the same path. I can't put Patricia through that, he'd scribbled, the words slightly blurred. I won't let her watch me disappear. I have to make Michael understand, to be ready to protect her from it too. The room spun. This wasn't just Michael's plan. This was a seed planted by his father, a desperate secret plea from beyond the grave. And my son, my beautiful, loyal son, wasn't trying to get rid of me. He was, in his own misguided way, trying to fulfill a promise to his dad, to protect me from a ghost he saw lurking in my own future. The weight of Robert's words pressed down on me. There on the cold linoleum floor, the dust from the closet swirling in the slants of afternoon light like forgotten ghosts. All the anger I'd felt toward Michael just moments before dissolved into a profound, aching sorrow that had nothing to do with me and everything to do with the man I'd loved for most of my life. He'd carried this fear alone, this terrifying secret, and I'd been too busy, too wrapped up in my own grief after he was gone, to see the signs he'd so carefully hidden. I remembered then, a crisp autumn day, about 2 years before his diagnosis, when he'd driven to the grocery store and returned an hour later, empty-handed and pale. "Forgot the list," he'd muttered, brushing it off with a joke about his old age. But the tremor in his hand as he reached for a coffee cup had been real. I'd dismissed it. I'd dismissed so much, chalking it up to stress or fatigue, never imagining the truth was so much darker. His journal wasn't just a confession. It was a love letter of the most heartbreaking kind. He wasn't trying to control my future from the grave. He was trying to spare me the pain he'd watched his own mother endure, the slow, eroding loss that he feared was his legacy, and he'd entrusted that fear to our son, burdening Michael with a promise that was now twisting our relationship into something strained and secretive. I clutched the journal to my chest, the leather cool against my skin, and let the tears come, not just for Robert, but for Michael, for the weight he'd been carrying all this time. He wasn't the villain in this story. He was a son trying to honor his father's dying wish, a man terrified of history repeating itself. But he'd gone about it all wrong, with brochures and plans instead of conversations and compassion. The thought of Leo's desperate cries took on a new, even more tragic dimension. My grandson wasn't just afraid of me leaving. He'd likely overheard whispered arguments between his parents about Grandma's mind, or that place, his child's mind weaving nightmares from half-understood truths. I had to fix this. I couldn't let my family be fractured by a well-intentioned but deeply flawed plan born from fear and a promise made in the shadow of illness. Pushing myself up from the floor, my joints protesting, I felt a new resolve harden within me. This wasn't a time for silence or secret discoveries. It was a time for truth, no matter how painful. I didn't call. Showing up unannounced felt necessary, like reclaiming my place in their lives, not as a problem to be managed, but as a mother and grandmother who was still very much present. The drive to Michael's house felt different this time. The same trees, the same houses, but the lens through which I saw them had shifted. I wasn't the betrayed mother approaching her betrayer. I was a woman armed with a painful truth, ready to bridge a chasm that grief had carved. When I pulled into the driveway, I saw Sarah through the front window, watering her beloved peace lilies. She looked up startled as I walked toward the door, her expression flickering from surprise to something guarded, almost apprehensive. She opened the door before I could knock. "Patricia, is everything okay?" she asked, her voice laced with a nervous tension that told me she knew exactly why I was there.
"We need to talk, Sarah. All of us," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I stepped inside, the familiar scent of lemon polish and toddler snacks washing over me. Just then, Leo came tearing around the corner, his face lighting up when he saw me. "Grandma, you came back!" He launched himself at my legs, and I knelt down, pulling him close, breathing in the simple, pure scent of his shampoo. "I'll always come back, my sweet boy," I whispered into his hair, a promise I intended to keep. Michael appeared in the hallway, his face a mask of confusion and dread. "Mom? What's going on?" He looked from me to Sarah, who gave a slight, almost imperceptible shake of her head. The air in the room was thick with unspoken words. "Let's sit down," I said, leading Leo to the living room couch. I kept him close, his small body a comforting anchor. Michael and Sarah sat opposite us, on the edge of their seats, bracing for a storm. I took a deep breath, placing Robert's small black journal on the coffee table between us. Michael's eyes locked onto it, and I saw the color drain from his face. "I found this today," I began, my voice soft but clear. "After Leo was so upset, I was looking for answers. I found the itinerary for Silver Sands, Michael, and I found this." I tapped the journal. "I know about your father's fear. I know about the promise he asked of you. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner." Michael looked down at his hands, his shoulders slumping in what looked like sheer exhaustion and relief. "Mom, I didn't know how to tell you," he finally said, his voice rough with emotion. "After Dad died, and then with the little things that started happening with you, the lost keys, forgetting plans, I just panicked. He made me promise, Mom. He made me swear I wouldn't let you go through what he saw with Grandma Helen. He said it was the cruelest thing, to watch someone you love just fade away." He looked at me, his eyes glistening. "I was so scared I was losing you too, and I thought if I could just get you somewhere safe, somewhere they could help, that I was doing what he wanted, protecting you." Hearing the pain in his voice, the genuine love and fear behind his actions, shattered any last remnant of my anger. "Oh, Michael," I sighed, my own eyes filling with tears. "Why didn't you just talk to me? We're a family. We're supposed to face these things together. Your father, he was afraid, and he was trying to protect me, but he was wrong to ask you to carry this alone. And I'm not your grandmother Helen. I'm still me." I looked at Sarah, who had tears streaming silently down her cheeks. "And Sarah, did you agree with this? Did you think this was the only way?" She shook her head vehemently. "No, Patricia, I didn't. I've been trying to get him to talk to you for months. I told him it was wrong to make plans behind your back. But he was so convinced, so driven by this promise, and I was worried too. We both were. But this wasn't the answer. I'm so sorry." We sat there for a long moment, the three of us, bound by love and fear, and now a glimmer of understanding. Leo, sensing this shift in mood, cuddled closer to me. "See, Daddy? Grandma's not going away," he said, his small voice firm with certainty. And in that moment, I knew we had a chance to heal, but the hardest part was yet to come. I had to make them see me, not just as a patient, but as a partner in whatever the future might hold.
The journey ahead would require an honesty we'd all been avoiding, and the first step was the most terrifying of all.
The silence in the room after Leo's innocent declaration felt like a held breath, a fragile peace that I was terrified to shatter. Michael's eyes met mine, filled with a mixture of relief and lingering guilt, and I knew that our conversation had only scratched the surface of the wounds we all carried. "See you soon, Grandma," Leo had said, and those words echoed in my heart as I drove away from my son's house, the night sky a blanket of stars overhead. But back in my own home, the stillness felt different, no longer suffocating, but charged with the weight of unfinished business. Robert's journal lay on the coffee table where I'd left it, a silent sentinel of secrets yet untold. I picked it up, my fingers tracing the worn leather, and settled into the armchair that had been Robert's favorite, the one where he'd spent his last days reading and watching the birds outside the window. As I opened it to the page where I'd left off, the words began to unravel a new thread of pain, one that had nothing to do with memory loss and everything to do with the financial foundations of our life together. Robert's handwriting, usually so steady, grew increasingly frantic in the later entries. He wrote about an investment he'd made years ago, without my knowledge, in a friend's startup company, a gamble he thought would secure our future, but had instead turned sour. "I've poured nearly half of our savings into it," he confessed in one passage, dated just months before his diagnosis. "If this fails, Patricia will be left with nothing but the house and a mountain of debt. I can't bear the thought of her struggling because of my foolishness." My heart hammered against my ribs as I read on, each word a blow. He'd told Michael about it, swearing him to secrecy, and had urged him to fix it if things went wrong. But Michael, grieving and overwhelmed, had apparently let it languish, too afraid to confront the mess or to tell me the truth. The pieces clicked into place with a cruel clarity. Michael's push for me to move to Silver Sands wasn't just about dementia. It was about money. He was trying to downsize my life to cover debts I never knew existed. I sat there for a long time, the journal heavy in my lap, tears of betrayal and heartache streaming down my face. How could Robert have kept this from me? We'd always handled finances together, or so I thought. And Michael? Had he seen this as another reason to bundle me away into a home? To sell the house and settle the debts without me ever knowing? The fragility of our newfound understanding threatened to crack. But as the initial shock subsided, a steely resolve took its place. I wouldn't let fear or secrets dictate my life anymore. I needed answers, and I needed them now, even if it meant facing another painful conversation. The next morning, I called Michael. My voice was calm but firm, a tone I hadn't used with him since he was a teenager in trouble. "We need to talk again, Michael, today. There's something else we haven't discussed." He agreed without argument, his voice weary, and within the hour, he was at my door alone. Sarah had stayed home with Leo, a fact I was grateful for. This was between mother and son, a reckoning long overdue. He stepped inside, his shoulders slumped, and I didn't offer coffee or pleasantries. I simply handed him the journal, open to the relevant pages. "Explain this to me, Michael, please." He read in silence, his face pale, and when he looked up, his eyes were filled with a fresh wave of shame. "Mom, I didn't know how to tell you. Dad made me promise to handle it, but after he died, I looked into it and the company had already gone bankrupt. The money was gone. I thought if I could just get you into a more affordable place, I could sell the house and cover the losses without you ever having to know." His voice broke. "I was trying to protect you from more heartache." "Protect me?" I whispered, the pain sharp in my chest. "Michael, keeping me in the dark isn't protection. It's imprisonment. I spent 40 years building a life with your father, and I have a right to know the truth about our finances, no matter how ugly." I took a deep breath.
forcing my voice to steady. How bad is it? He swallowed hard. The investment was $150,000. It's gone. And there are some credit lines he took out against the house that need to be repaid. Between that and the daily expenses, your savings are depleted. The words hung in the air, a death sentence on the future I'd imagined. But strangely, instead of panic, I felt a surge of clarity. This was a problem that could be solved, not with secrets, but with action. Okay, I said, nodding slowly. Then we face it together. We sell the house if we have to, but we do it on our terms, with transparency. No more hidden plans, no more decisions made behind my back. I reached out and took his hand, my grip firm. Michael, I need you to trust me. I'm still your mother, and I'm still capable. We will get through this, but only if we're a team. He crumpled then, sobbing into his hands, all the weight of his double burden finally overflowing. I'm so sorry, Mom. I thought I was doing what Dad wanted, what was best for you. I held him, my own tears mingling with his, and in that moment, we were not mother and son, but two broken people clinging to each other in the storm. When his tears subsided, we sat at the kitchen table with spreadsheets and bank statements, facing the numbers head-on. It was daunting, but for the first time, it felt honest. We made a plan. We'd consult a financial advisor, explore options for the house, and I'd consider part-time work at the local library, something I'd loved before retirement. It wasn't the future I'd envisioned, but it was one I had agency over. As Michael left, promising to return the next day with Sarah to continue the conversation, I felt a weary but genuine hope. We had torn down the walls of secrecy, and though the road ahead was steep, we would walk it together. But later that evening, as I was sorting through old files in the study, I found another hidden piece of the puzzle, a letter tucked inside a book of Robert's poetry, addressed to me in his handwriting. My hands trembled as I opened it, and the words inside would force me to question everything I thought I knew about our marriage, his love, and the very nature of the memories I held dear. The letter was on that thick, cream-colored stationery Robert had always favored, the physical weight of it in my hand feeling like the weight of the past itself. My name was written on the front, in his elegant, looping cursive, for my Patricia, and the sight of it made my breath catch. It felt like a message from the grave, one I was almost afraid to open. With trembling fingers, I broke the seal and unfolded the pages, my eyes scanning the familiar handwriting that now held words I was never meant to see while he was alive. My dearest Patricia, it began, and the love in that salutation was so palpable it brought fresh tears to my eyes. If you are reading this, then I am gone, and the worst of my fears have likely come to pass. I have left a mess, my love, and for that I am more sorry than you will ever know. He went on to describe the failed investment with his friend not as a foolish gamble, but as a desperate, last-ditch effort to rebuild what he had already lost. Years before the bad investment with his friend, he confessed, he had made a series of smaller, riskier trades in an attempt to generate more income for our retirement, losses he had hidden from me by forging bank statements and intercepting mail. The $150,000 was money he'd borrowed to try and cover those initial losses, a hole he kept digging deeper in a silent, shame-filled panic. I watched my mother lose her mind to dementia, and I saw the financial devastation it wrought on my father. I was determined it would not happen to us. I wanted to build a fortress around you, a wall of money so high that no illness, no misfortune could ever touch you. Instead, I have left you vulnerable. I have broken every vow I ever made to you, not in my heart, but in my actions. The pages trembled in my hands. This wasn't just a secret, it was a confession of a double life, a life of quiet desperation and deception that had run parallel to our seemingly happy marriage. The man I thought I knew, the man who balanced the checkbook every Sunday and preached financial prudence, had been living a lie for years. The room felt airless. I stumbled to the kitchen, needing to sit down, the letter clutched in my hand. All those late nights he'd spent in the study, claiming he was working, had he been staring at spreadsheets of his own making, watching our security evaporate? The memory of him reassuring me after I'd questioned a missing statement from a savings account came back with brutal clarity. "It's just a clerical error, honey. I'll call them tomorrow," he'd said, kissing my forehead. And I, who had trusted him with my life, had believed him completely. The betrayal was a cold stone in my gut, but it was mingled with an overwhelming grief for him, for the terrible, isolating burden he had carried alone. He hadn't been trying to hurt me, he'd been trying, in his profoundly flawed way, to protect me, and in doing so, he had created the very catastrophe he feared most.
I didn't sleep that night. I sat at the kitchen table as the hours ticked by, the letter and the journal sitting side by side like artifacts from a life I was only just beginning to understand. By the time the sun began to tinge the sky with pale gold, my grief had crystallized into a clear, sharp purpose. Robert's secrets had dictated our lives for long enough. It was time for full, radical honesty, not just with Michael, but with myself. When Michael and Sarah arrived that morning, their faces etched with concern, I was waiting for them. I had made a pot of strong coffee and laid the journal and the letter on the table between us. "There's more," I said quietly, my voice hoarse from lack of sleep but steady with resolve. "And you both need to hear it." I watched their faces as I explained, as I read aloud sections of Robert's heartbreaking confession. Sarah's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with shock, while Michael looked utterly devastated, the revelation stripping away the last of his composure. "All this time," he whispered, "I thought I was failing him by not moving fast enough to fix the one investment. I had no idea the scale of it." He looked at me, his expression raw. "Mom, I am so sorry for all of it." "This isn't your fault, Michael," I said, meaning it. "This was between your father and me. But now it's our problem to solve, together." We spent the next several hours in a whirlwind of difficult conversations and necessary planning. We contacted a financial advisor and a lawyer, laying all the cards on the table. The path forward was daunting. Selling the house was no longer just an option, but a necessity. But for the first time, we were a united front, navigating the crisis with open eyes instead of hidden agendas. It was exhausting, emotionally wrenching work, but as they prepared to leave, Michael pulled me into a long, tight hug. "I love you, Mom," he said, his voice thick. "We're going to get through this." I believed him. After they left, the house felt different again. It was no longer just the repository of Robert's secrets or the symbol of a lost future. It was a structure full of memories, both beautiful and now painfully complex, that I would soon be leaving behind. I started the arduous process of packing, of deciding what to keep and what to let go. It was in the back of my closet, in a box labeled winter coats, that I found the final piece of the puzzle. Tucked beneath my old wool peacoat was a small, locked metal box I hadn't seen in decades. Robert had given it to me long ago, saying it was for our most precious memories, but I had assumed it held old love letters and photographs. I'd forgotten about it. Now, with a jolt, I remembered where I'd hidden the key years ago, inside the hollowed-out pages of the very book of poetry where I'd found his letter. My heart pounding with a sense of grim inevitability, I retrieved the key, fit it into the lock, and lifted the lid. There were no love letters inside. Instead, I found a stack of faded Polaroid photographs and a small embroidered handkerchief that I recognized instantly. It had belonged to Robert's mother, Helen, and the photographs, they were of her, in her younger days, standing with a man who was not my father-in-law. The story I was about to uncover would change my understanding of our family's history forever, revealing that the secrets I had unearthed were only the beginning. The face staring back from the faded Polaroid was undeniably Helen's, but it was a Helen I had never known. Young, vibrant, her head thrown back in laughter, her eyes alight with a joy I'd never seen during the weary, clouded years I'd known her. And the man whose arm was wrapped around her waist, whose own face was split by a wide, easy grin, was a stranger. He was not my stern, reserved father-in-law. The photo was creased at the corners, handled often, a secret treasure. Beneath it, wrapped in the delicate embroidered handkerchief, was a small, folded note. With hands that felt numb, I opened it. The handwriting was Helen's, a flowing, graceful script I recognized from the few recipe cards she'd given me. "My dearest Joseph," it began, and my breath hitched. Joseph. My father-in-law's name was Arthur. These few stolen hours are the only thing that keep my heart beating in this quiet house. He suspects nothing, but the guilt is a constant ache. We must be more careful. Meet me at our usual place next Tuesday. All my love, always. H. The world tilted on its axis once again. Joseph. Our usual place. Stolen hours? The words painted a picture of a secret life, a love affair that had existed in the shadows of Helen's marriage to Arthur. This was the hidden history Robert had somehow discovered. The cruelest thing he'd referenced in his journal wasn't just the dementia, but the devastating knowledge of his mother's infidelity and the profound unhappiness it implied. He hadn't just been afraid of a disease, he'd been terrified of a legacy of secrecy and betrayal, a template for a fractured, unhappy life that he feared was his inheritance. This box wasn't for our most precious memories. It was his secret archive of his mother's pain, the evidence of the brokenness he was determined to shield me from. He had tried to build a financial fortress to protect me, and in doing so, he had replicated the very secrecy he sought to overcome. I sat on the floor of my closet, surrounded by dust and memories, the photographs fanned out around me. There were more. Helen and Joseph by a lake, their hands barely touching. Helen smiling shyly at the camera from the driver's seat of an old car. Joseph visible in the passenger seat. This was the real woman, the one buried beneath the duties of wife and mother, the one who had slowly faded away long before the dementia officially claimed her. And Robert, my serious, loving Robert, had carried this knowledge alone, a boy grappling with the complex, painful truth about his parents' marriage. It explained so much about his own fierce devotion to me, his almost obsessive need for our life to be a picture of stability and honesty. He had been trying to correct the past, to build something so pure and transparent that the ghosts of Helen and Joseph and Arthur could never touch it. The weight of this final revelation was immense, but it didn't crush me as the others had. Instead, it brought a strange, sorrowful sense of peace. I was no longer just cleaning up a financial mess. I was laying multiple generations of ghosts to rest. I carefully placed the photographs and the note back into the metal box. This was not my story to tell Michael, not now, perhaps not ever. This was Robert's burden and his mother's secret, and I would honor that. Some truths are too heavy to pass on, but understanding this deepened my resolve to break the cycle, to ensure that the legacy I left for Leo was one of openness and courage, not fear and hidden boxes. When Michael and Sarah came over the next day, our work felt different, infused with a new sense of purpose. We were no longer just salvaging a financial situation, we were consciously building a new foundation for our family. We met with the financial advisor, a kind, no-nonsense woman named Linda, and crafted a realistic plan. The house would go on the market, the proceeds paying off the debts, and securing a small, manageable apartment for me. I told them about my idea to work part-time at the library, and to my surprise and relief, they supported me completely. "I think that's a great idea, Mom," Michael said, a genuine smile touching his eyes for the first time in weeks. "You've always loved it there." It was a decision born of necessity, but it felt like a choice.
My choice. And that made all the difference. A week later, I was boxing up the kitchen when Leo came running in, Sarah following behind him with a warm, grateful smile. "We brought you lunch," Leo announced, holding up a paper bag from my favorite deli. As we sat at the folding table I'd set up amidst the boxes, eating sandwiches and laughing at Leo's stories from kindergarten, I felt a profound sense of gratitude. The future was uncertain, and the path had been carved by pain and secrets. But in this moment, surrounded by my family, the air clear of deception for the first time in years, I felt a hope I hadn't dared to feel since Robert died. We were wounded, yes, but we were healing together. Later, as I walked them to the car, Leo held my hand tightly. "I love you, Grandma," he said, his small voice full of simple, uncomplicated faith. "I love you more, my sweet boy," I whispered back, knowing that whatever came next, this love was the only legacy that truly mattered. The real work of building our new beginning was just starting, and I was finally ready to face it not as a victim of the past, but as the architect of whatever was to come.
The new apartment was smaller, a compact two-bedroom that smelled of fresh paint and possibility. And as I unpacked the first box labeled kitchen, I felt a strange sense of lightness amidst the fatigue. It wasn't the home I'd built with Robert, but it was mine. A blank slate where the ghosts of the past could finally be laid to rest. The move had been a whirlwind of activity, with Michael and Sarah there every step of the way, their presence a steady anchor in the chaos. Leo, my little helper, had insisted on arranging his favorite books on the shelf in the spare room, declaring it Grandma's reading nook. And his simple, joyful certainty that this was a happy new beginning was a balm to my soul. The job at the library started the following week, and those first few days were a welcome distraction. The hushed stillness, the familiar scent of old paper and ink, the simple pleasure of helping a child find the perfect book. For a few hours each day, I wasn't Patricia the widow, or Patricia the burden, or Patricia the keeper of secrets. I was just Patricia, the library aide. And in that simplicity, I found pieces of myself I'd thought I'd lost. But peace, I was learning, is a fragile thing, and it was tested one rainy Thursday afternoon about a month after I'd settled in. I was sorting through a donation bin of old books when a familiar name on a faded spine made my blood run cold. The collected poems of Robert Frost, inscribed in that same elegant handwriting I'd seen in the letter and the journal. My hands trembled as I opened it. There, on the flyleaf, was an inscription I'd never seen before. "To Helen, who understands the road not taken. Forever yours, Joseph." Below it, in a different ink, was a note from Robert. "Found in mother's effects. She never let it go." The book felt heavy, charged with a history that seemed determined to follow me. Why had this book surfaced now, in this very library? It felt like a message, a final piece of the puzzle I'd tried so hard to set aside. I tucked it into my bag, my heart pounding, and tried to focus on my work. But my mind was racing. That evening, alone in my new apartment, I stared at the book, the inscription burning into my mind, "The road not taken." Is that how Helen had seen her life? A series of paths not taken, loves not chosen? And Robert, finding this, had he seen it as a cautionary tale, a warning against the secrets that fester and the choices that haunt you? I knew I had promised myself not to burden Michael with this, but the weight of it felt unbearable alone. The next time he came over for dinner, the book sat on the coffee table between us like a silent third guest. He noticed it immediately, his eyes narrowing in recognition. "Is that Dad's?" he asked, his voice cautious. I took a deep breath and told him everything, about finding the metal box, the photographs, the note, and now this book. I watched his face cycle through shock, confusion, and finally a deep, weary sadness. "So Grandma Helen, she was unhappy," he said softly, staring at the inscription. "All those years, we just thought she was quiet, reserved.
but she was living a whole other life in her heart. He looked at me, his eyes full of a new understanding. And Robert, finding this, he knew. This is what he was really trying to protect you from. Not just the money or the dementia, but this legacy of silent suffering. We talked for hours that night, not about solutions or plans, but about the complexities of love and marriage, the sacrifices made, the secrets kept. It was the most honest conversation we'd ever had, and it healed something in both of us that I hadn't even realized was still broken.
A few days later, an unexpected visitor came to the library. An elderly man with kind eyes and a slightly nervous demeanor approached the desk, asking if we had any local history books on the Lake community from the 1950s. Something about him felt familiar, a flicker of recognition that I couldn't place. As I helped him find the section, he glanced at my name tag. "Patricia," he said, his voice hesitant. "I'm sorry to bother you, but you wouldn't happen to be Patricia Evans, Helen's daughter-in-law?" My breath caught in my throat. I nodded, and he extended a hand. "I'm Joseph. Joseph Miller." The world seemed to slow down. Joseph. Helen's Joseph. He looked old, of course, but in his eyes, I could see the ghost of the man from the photographs, the one who had made Helen laugh so freely. He explained that he'd heard through a mutual acquaintance that I'd moved into the area and worked at the library. He'd wanted to meet me for years, he said, to apologize. "I loved Helen very much," he whispered, his eyes glistening. "But we both made our choices. I've always regretted the pain it must have caused her family, especially Robert. He found out, you know. He confronted me once, a long time ago. He was so angry, so protective of his mother. I think he blamed me for her unhappiness." We sat in a quiet corner of the library, and he told me stories about Helen, her love of poetry, her secret ambition to be a painter, her vibrant spirit that was slowly dimmed by a marriage that felt like a cage. It wasn't a justification, he said, just an explanation. He gave me a small folded drawing, a sketch Helen had made of the lake where they used to meet. "I think she would have wanted you to have this," he said. "She always spoke so highly of you, of the love she saw between you and Robert. She said you were the daughter she never had." Meeting Joseph was like stepping through a portal into the past, but instead of feeling like an intrusion, it felt like a completion. The fragmented pieces of Helen's story finally settled into a coherent picture, not of scandal, but of human frailty and longing. I shared the conversation with Michael, and we both felt a sense of closure, a permission to let go of the judgments and what-ifs. The past was what it was. We couldn't change it, but we could learn from it. We decided to have a small family dinner at my apartment, a celebration of our new beginning. Sarah brought a beautiful salad, Michael grilled burgers on my tiny balcony, and Leo entertained us with his elaborate tales of superhero adventures. As we sat around the table, laughing and talking, the air clear of secrets, I felt a profound gratitude for this second chance. Later, as I was putting away the leftovers, Michael came into the kitchen and hugged me tightly. "I'm proud of you, Mom, for everything." In that moment, I knew we were going to be okay. But as I closed the door behind them that night, I noticed a sealed envelope that had been slipped under my door during the day. It was addressed to me in a handwriting I didn't recognize, and the return address was for a law firm I'd never heard of. My heart gave a little lurch. What now? I opened it carefully, and as I read the first few lines, my hands began to shake all over again. It was from the lawyer handling the final dissolution of Robert's estate, and it mentioned a safety deposit box he'd maintained in a bank across town, one I never knew existed, one that required both my signature and Michael's to open. The contents, it said, were labeled, "For Patricia and Michael when the time is right." The envelope felt heavy in my hands, far heavier than its single sheet of paper should have been. "When the time is right." What time was that, exactly? After all the secrets had been dragged into the light? After we'd already sold the house and started over? A fresh wave of exhaustion washed over me, the kind that goes right down to the bone. I didn't know if I had the strength for another one of Robert's revelations, for another layer of the past to be peeled back. Part of me wanted to throw the letter away, to pretend I'd never seen it, to protect the fragile peace we'd finally built. But I knew I couldn't. The cycle of secrecy had to end with me. I called Michael, reading him the letter over the phone. His silence on the other end was profound. "I can come over now," he finally said, his voice tight with a mixture of dread and resolve. "No," I told him, my own voice surprisingly steady. "Let's meet there tomorrow morning. Let's get this over with." The bank was cool and quiet, all marble and hushed voices. The manager led us to a small private room and placed the long metal box on the table between us. It looked so innocuous, so final. Michael and I exchanged a look that held all the pain and understanding of the last few months, and then we both used our keys. The lid opened with a soft, metallic sigh. Inside there were no stacks of bonds, no more hidden financial records. Instead, there were two thick sealed envelopes, one with my name on it, one with Michael's, written in Robert's hand. And beneath them, a velvet pouch that felt heavy with coins, and a smaller, older-looking journal, its cover worn soft with age. My hands were trembling as I picked up the envelope addressed to me. Michael just stared at his, as if he could see through the paper to the words within. I broke the seal and began to read. "My dearest Patricia," it began, and the love in those words was so immediate, so present, it was as if he were in the room with me. "If you are reading this, then you have faced the storm I created, and you have survived. I have no right to ask for your forgiveness, but I hope in time you can find a way to understand. The man who wrote those other things, the man who hid the truth from you, was a ghost of the man I wanted to be, haunted by a fear I could never name." He went on to explain that the velvet pouch contained a collection of silver dollars and rare coins his own father had left him, something he'd kept entirely separate, untouched by his financial mistakes. "It's not much," he wrote, "but it's clean. It's something I can leave for you and for Leo that isn't tainted by my failures." Then he mentioned the smaller journal. This was my mother's. In her more lucid moments, before the fog took her completely, she gave it to me. She told me it was the truth of her heart. I was too angry to read it then. I was too young to understand her complexities. Perhaps now you and Michael can. I looked up, tears streaming freely down my face, to see that Michael was also crying, his letter held loosely in his hand. "He knew," Michael whispered, his voice choked. "He knew I'd find the itinerary. He knew we'd be here. He says he's sorry for putting this burden on me, that he was wrong to ask me to keep his secrets, that a son shouldn't have to be his father's keeper." The raw relief in his eyes was heartbreaking. We had spent months feeling betrayed by Robert, but in this box he had anticipated his own feelings and was offering us, from beyond the grave, the only amends he could. It wasn't about the money in the pouch. It was about the acknowledgement. He saw us. He saw the mess he'd made, and he was sorry. We sat in that quiet room for a long time, not speaking, just holding our letters and sharing the weight of this final, painful gift. We took the velvet pouch and the small journal home, the contents of the box feeling both like a closure and a new beginning. That night after Michael had gone, I sat in my quiet living room and opened Helen's journal. The first entry was from 1952, a year after her marriage to Arthur. The walls of this house are so quiet. I feel my laughter drying up inside me like a forgotten well. As I read her words, her dreams, her descriptions of Joseph and the stolen moments of joy, I didn't see a betrayer or an adulteress. I saw a woman, much like myself,
trying to find her way through a life that had turned out differently than she had planned. Her story wasn't a cautionary tale, it was a human one. And in reading it, I finally, fully, forgave Robert for his. The ghosts were quiet now. The road ahead, for the first time in a very long time, felt like my own.
The peace that came from reading Helen's journal was a profound, settling thing, like a deep breath after holding it for a lifetime. For the first time, the narrative of our family felt complete, not as a series of perfect moments, but as a tapestry of real, flawed people doing their best with the hands they were dealt. I closed the delicate book feeling not like a keeper of secrets, but a witness to a story that finally made sense. This sense of closure allowed me to fully embrace my new life. The apartment began to feel less like a downsized necessity and more like a home I was curating for myself. I framed Helen's sketch of the lake and hung it in my reading nook, a quiet tribute to the woman I felt I now understood. My days at the library settled into a comforting rhythm, and the simple pleasure of recommending a book to a child or helping a student find research materials brought a sense of purpose that went beyond a paycheck. It was during one of these ordinary, peaceful afternoons that Sarah called, her voice tight with a strain I recognized instantly. "Patricia, can I come over? It's Michael." My heart sank. When she arrived, her face was pale, her hands worrying the strap of her purse. We sat at my small kitchen table, and she told me that Michael had withdrawn again, falling into a silent, brooding mood that had lasted for days. "He won't talk about it," she said, her eyes pleading for understanding. "He just shuts down. It's like after his dad died all over again. I've tried to be patient, but Leo is starting to notice, and I don't know what to do." I listened, my heart aching for her, for my son, for my grandson, and I realized that uncovering the past wasn't a one-time event. Its echoes would ripple through our lives, and we had to learn how to navigate them together. After Sarah left, I knew what I had to do. This wasn't a problem for me to solve for Michael, but I could meet him where he was. I drove to his house, finding him alone in the garage, ostensibly organizing tools, but mostly just staring at a blank space on the wall. "Your father's secrets almost broke us, Michael," I said, my voice calm but firm, cutting through the heavy silence. "We can't let his silence do the same to you. Talk to me." He flinched, then slowly put down the wrench in his hand. The story tumbled out, halting and raw. It was the guilt, he said, the overwhelming, suffocating guilt. Now that the crisis was over, the full weight of his actions had settled on him. The secret plans for Silver Sands, his complicity in his father's financial deception, the years of lying to me by omission. "I look at Leo," he whispered, his voice cracking, "and I think, what if I'm messing him up just by being his dad? What if this brokenness is all I have to give him?" He was terrified that he had inherited not just his father's fear, but his capacity for deception, and that he was doomed to repeat the same mistakes. His confession was a pivotal moment, a test of all the healing we thought we'd achieved. I didn't offer empty platitudes. I took his hand, calloused and familiar, and held it tight. "Michael, listen to me. Your father's legacy isn't the brokenness. His legacy is that he loved us so much it terrified him. Your legacy is that you're sitting here, in your own pain, terrified of hurting your son. That is not brokenness. That is love. And it is the greatest gift you can ever give him." I told him that the cycle ends when we choose to be different, when we choose to be vulnerable and honest, even when it's hard. You are not your father, and you are a wonderful father to Leo. He broke them, sobbing in a way I hadn't seen since he was a small boy, and I held him, there, amidst the smell of gasoline and sawdust, and we let the last of the poison drain from the wound. The change wasn't instantaneous, but it was steady. Michael started seeing a therapist to work through the guilt and anxiety he'd carried for so long. He began making a conscious effort to be more open with Sarah, to share his fears instead of burying them. A few weeks later, they invited me over for a barbecue. The difference was palpable. Michael was present, laughing, playing catch with Leo in the backyard in a way that was free and easy, the constant shadow of worry gone from his eyes. As I watched them, Sarah came and stood beside me, slipping her arm through mine.
"Thank you," she said softly. "I have my husband back." In that moment, surrounded by the sounds of my family's joy, I felt a certainty that we had truly turned a corner. We had faced the worst of our history and chosen to build something new from its ashes. But life, I was learning, is never a straight line. As the sun set and we began to clean up, my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a number I didn't recognize, and the message was simple, yet it sent a fresh, unexpected jolt through my system. "Hi, Patricia. This is Caroline Miller, Joseph's daughter. I was hoping we could talk."
The name on my phone screen seemed to pulse with a life of its own, a direct link to the part of the past I had only recently laid to rest. Joseph's daughter. My mind raced, conjuring images of a woman who might look like Helen, who might hold another set of secrets I wasn't sure I had the strength to hear. For a fleeting moment, the old panic threatened to resurface, the instinct to hide, to protect the fragile new world we'd built. But I looked across the yard at Michael, who was now swinging a laughing Leo onto his shoulders, and at Sarah, who gave me a warm, questioning smile. I was not the same woman I had been months ago. I had learned to face the truth, no matter how uncomfortable. "Of course," I typed back, my fingers steady. "I'd be happy to talk." We met 2 days later, at a quiet coffee shop downtown. Caroline Miller was a woman in her late 50s, with kind, intelligent eyes and a graceful posture that reminded me startlingly of Helen's in the photographs. There was no hostility in her gaze, only a nervous curiosity. After we'd settled with our coffees, she clasped her hands on the table and began. "My father told me he spoke to you," she said. "It meant the world to him. He's been lighter since. He carried the weight of that story for decades." She explained that Joseph had been diagnosed with a progressive illness, and it had prompted him to finally share the full truth of his relationship with Helen, with his only daughter. "He wanted me to know who he really was, all of it, and he asked me if it was ever possible to find you." She opened her large purse and pulled out a flat, carefully wrapped package. "He wanted you to have this. He said Helen would have wanted you to have it too." I unwrapped the package to find a small, beautiful oil painting of a sunset over a lake, the same lake from Helen's sketch, but rendered in rich, vibrant colors that seemed to glow with an inner light. It was signed in the corner with a delicate H. "She painted it for him," Caroline said softly. "He kept it hidden all these years. He said it was the only thing he had that truly captured her spirit." I ran my fingers over the textured paint, feeling the echoes of Helen's passion and longing, and I was overwhelmed not by sadness, but by a sense of profound connection. This wasn't a secret, it was a gift. We talked for over an hour. Two women from different branches of a tangled family tree, sharing stories not of betrayal, but of the complicated people we had loved. Caroline told me about her father's quiet, devoted life as a history professor, forever marked by the love he couldn't have. I shared a little about Robert, about his fears and his great love for me. It was a conversation of understanding, not judgment. When we parted, she hugged me, a spontaneous gesture that felt surprisingly natural. "Thank you for seeing him," she whispered. "Thank you for not turning him away." Driving home with Helen's painting on the passenger seat, I felt a strange and beautiful sense of expansion. Our family story, which had once felt so small and suffocating, had just grown new, unexpected branches. It was no longer just about us. It was about Helen and Joseph, about Caroline, about the myriad ways love persists and changes shape across generations. That weekend, when Michael and his family came over for dinner, I showed them the painting. I told them about meeting Caroline, about her father's illness, and about the peaceful understanding we'd reached. Michael was quiet for a long time, studying the vibrant strokes of color. "It's beautiful," he finally said, his voice thick with emotion. "It's like we're getting to know her now, after all this time. The real her." He looked at me. It's good, Mom. It's all good. We hung the painting in the living room, right where the light from the west window would catch it in the afternoon, and it didn't feel like a ghost in the room. It felt like a welcome guest. Life settled into a new, deeper kind of normal. I found joy in my work, in my family, in the quiet independence of my small apartment. The sharp edges of grief and betrayal had been worn smooth by time and truth, leaving behind a landscape that was complex but navigable. I thought that was the end of our story, that we had reached the quiet epilogue. But life, I should have known, always has one more lesson to teach. It came on a perfectly ordinary Tuesday, 6 months later, in the form of a certified letter. It was from the corporate office of the Silver Sands Senior Living Community. My first instinct was to throw it away, a relic of a painful time, but something made me open it. It wasn't a bill or a reminder. It was a formal apology and a check for a significant sum of money. The letter stated that an internal audit had revealed unethical and pressurized sales tactics used by a since-terminated representative in our region. They had reviewed my file and the unsolicited plan that had been sent to me, and they were refunding the entirety of the non-refundable deposit Michael had paid in a moment of panic and misguided protection. As I stared at the check, I didn't feel anger or even relief. I felt a quiet, powerful sense of justice, a confirmation that the universe, in its own slow and mysterious way, was finally settling its accounts. I called Michael and we laughed together, a free, joyful sound that held no trace of the pain that name had once evoked. We decided to use the money to start a college fund for Leo, a perfect, hopeful circle. It felt like the final page had been turned, the book closed at last. But as I hung up the phone, I looked at Helen's painting, at the vibrant, untamed sunset, and I realized that some stories don't really end. They just become part of who you are, forever.